Well, hello and welcome to Up Late with Ben Northey. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land I'm on, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Well, those of you who joined me last week would have enjoyed the opportunity to get to know the MSO's principal viola player, Christopher Moore, as well as learn a little about exotic chooks and some home baking as well. It's all part of the service here at Up Late with Ben Northey. All of our chats in this series have been a fantastic chance to gain some insights into life as a professional orchestral musician, but also to get to know the musicians and characters behind the instruments and what factors help them get to their position as elite professional music makers. And remember that at any time you can ask a question of my guest tonight by typing it into the chat window on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll get to them later on in the chat. And it's nice to be doing this on a Monday night too. I think it's good. Monday nights, it's good for musicians because more musicians can watch. It's kind of like an industry night off after all, traditionally. And now that we have an industry working again, or kind of anyway, we're getting there. It's interesting to note that ABC TV's popular Q&A is moving to Thursday nights next year. Now, rumor has it that the move may be unrelated to the popularity of our classical music chat show. I don't think so. I think those two things are linked. So watch out, ABC TV, we're coming for you. Last week, the MSO had another busy week of recording projects for the imminent launch of MSO Live, the online digital platform containing all things MSO, live concerts, special events, education resources, archived performances and interviews. And in between rehearsals last week, I sat down and pre-recorded a chat with the MSO's principal flute, Prudence Davis, who's this year celebrating a stunning 40 years with the orchestra. So keep an eye out for that special episode of Up Late with Ben Northey, which will be available through the MSO Facebook and YouTube page channel very soon. So it is a new experience to be performing with an orchestra after such an extended break this year in 2020. It's also a new experience from a logistical point of view, as distancing requirements mean that musicians still have to spread out, at least here in Melbourne, across the stage in a COVID-safe way. And this makes the connections between us more challenging. We're generally about 2 meters apart, I think 3 meters from the flutes. So that's a long way, actually, when you look at it and see the gap between the woodwinds and the strings. Members of the orchestra who can play whilst wearing masks are also expected to wear masks again, which is a fascinating study in the way we communicate with our facial gestures and how much we rely on these kinds of cues to make music together. And some of you may have heard our broadcast on yesterday, I think it was, on ABC Classic, which was taken from the performance on Thursday night at Hamer Hall, which we recorded, also videoed for MSO Live. And this concert included Deborah Cheatham's musical acknowledgement of country, long time living here, Beethoven's Romance in F major, performed beautifully by our co-concertmaster Sophie Rowell. The first movement of the Mozart Clarinet Concerto, played by our own David Thomas, principal clarinet, and concluded with, I just thought, a fascinating arrangement of Mussorgsky's Timeless Pictures at an exhibition. It was done by Melbourne-based composer Julian New, but that was originally for piano, that work, and everyone's had a go at this. The most common one is Ravel, but there's loads of other arrangements. I thought Julian's was just absolutely stunning, very unique and individual, and had a lot of his influences contained within it. I hope you have a chance to listen to it on the ABC Classic website, or even just better, watch it when MSO Live goes online. And I felt that the reimagining of something familiar like pictures at an exhibition has real resonances with our own re-emerging lives here in Australia. I guess it's kind of everywhere, particularly here in Melbourne. It's familiar as we go out to do the things that we used to do. It's different at the same time. That's a bit like that arrangement of Julian News as well. One of the musicians who was involved in the performance is my guest tonight. He's the principal second violin of the MSO. He's a leader. He's got minions. I think that's how it works, isn't it, Maddie? But his wife is in the section, so maybe not minions. I don't think that would go down very well, actually, having a wife that's a musician. It's a position he won in 2010 after first joining the orchestra as a member of the second violin section in 2000. And he's also completed bachelor's degrees in science and engineering. I mean, that's unnecessary, really, don't you think? Bit sickening. Far too much intelligence. I mean, fine, Be smart, Maddie. You don't have to show off about it. Like me, he's a product of the music-making juggernaut that is the city of Ballarat, and he's joining me tonight from his home here in Melbourne. Welcome to you, Matthew Tomkins.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Great to be here.
So have you ever given your wife, Philippa, some solid feedback as the principal second violin? Ever have to turn around and, a bit of discipline in the section, or no?
No, I know better than that.
Yeah, I conducted Joanne once. Joanne was playing fourth horn. I didn't even look at her. I was just like, I'm not even looking over there. That's all good. Hey, I wanted to ask you, what did you think of Julian Yu's arrangement of pictures at an exhibition?
Look, I love it. It's yeah, as you say, it's such a familiar piece, both in the piano version, and particularly, the Ravel is it's a bit of a warhorse, I guess, of the repertoire. So I've played it a lot, but yeah, it's just so interesting hearing all these things in different instruments. Instead of a saxophone, you've got the cor anglais. Instead of the trumpet in the promenades, it's the solo viola. There's the trumpet also with the clarinet plays that instead.
That's right. Yeah, in the Goldenberg and Schmoe. Yeah, variation.
So it just is kind of hearing all these kind of familiar tunes, but in a different way. And some of the effects that Julian gets they're quite amazing. Like in the castle, you kind of hear these echoes of, you can imagine the sound just kind of bouncing around these stone walls. And
yeah, it's been a long time since I've conducted something that I've heard the sound. I've looked at the score and I've heard the sound, and I think I've never actually heard an orchestra sound like that before, or I don't quite understand. Like, he sort of displaces melodies and things, and it creates this spatial effect, like being in a cave, or, as you say, big old castle. But it's just a sign of his genius, isn't it? That he's so clever.
Such an imagination and such incredible ears, and to be able to kind of translate that is great. Yeah, I really enjoyed playing it.
Hey, speaking of pictures, I see your artwork's coming along well there behind you. You've been working hard at those. What's going?
I've had a lot of spare time in lockdown, so
it's coming along really well. Don't let anyone discourage you from pursuing that second goal of yours.
Sometimes people go to modern art galleries and say, I could do that.
So your children are how old now?
6 and 8.
Yeah, right. Ben and Elsa, and that's
Ben and Elsa. Yeah. So I think these were Father's Day presents last year. So.
Beautiful. Oh, isn't that good? You've kept those. I think I've got a drawer of those somewhere around here too.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah, and are they safely in bed? Is Pip looking after?
The doors are all shut in the room I'm in, so anything could be out there. I don't hear screaming, so I think we're probably safe.
That's good. I've bolted mine closed. So
yeah, I don't have a lock on, but yeah.
Yeah, you've got to get one in. You need a lock. Yeah. You need a lock. Look, I was talking about last week, and I have to say I'm still recovering. It feels like we're ending the year with a real flurry of work after being unable to play for so long. But I mean, has it been a bit of a shock to the system for you? I mean, I only did 2 projects. Admittedly, they were big and difficult ones in many ways, but I just found it very fatiguing. Was it the same for you?
Yeah, it really was, actually. I mean, it's funny. You kind of, during a normal non-COVID year, you're used to performing every week. Normally we'll do 2 or 3 concerts a week, and you rehearse for 2 or 3 days, you practice, and you kind of your muscles are just kind of in shape to do it. So having not been playing for that kind of length of time throughout the year, I was in bed probably an hour and a half earlier every night after a day of rehearsal than I had been, and just wiped out.
Yeah, I found it hard to sleep too. I found my brain was so active with music, floating through it. It's often the case. Yeah, but even more so somehow that week, because it highlighted the difference between obviously doing, not playing in an orchestra, but just how mentally engaged you have to be to play in an orchestra, and how physical the work is. Did you feel that? It's kind of like, wow, this is actually full on.
Both the mental aspect of just listening to everything that's going on around you, and you're always kind of thinking where I fit in, who am I playing with, who do I have to listen to, all those kind of connections are, in my brain at least, that's a constant constant kind of dialogue with myself every time we play.
Yeah.
But and also just the physical aspect of, you know, sitting in a chair for that amount of time is something you haven't done for a long time, and just, you know, just having your arms up.
Yeah. Well, I felt like also we worked hard, let's face it, because,
Yeah.
you know, first week back, and we had that Julian New arrangement was very challenging, but also just the distancing. So we rely so much on what we can hear and proximity to our other colleagues. Being spread out makes it much harder. What was that like from a point of view of being distanced?
Yeah, it does. It adds an extra degree of difficulty, definitely, because you're normally, you know, like I say, you're always listening to things, but you know, if you're further back in the section, I'm right up the front, but, you know, you kind of rely on the desk or your desk partner for starters, which we don't have, because at the moment we're all using individual music stands.
See, even that's very different, isn't it?
So you've got someone right next to you playing off the same part to kind of bounce off, and then the desk behind you, you can normally hear them, and they hear the desk behind them, and there's all these kind of connections that you rely on that sort of all come together. But then when it's, you know, you're on your own, you kind of only, well, not only hear yourself, but that's the main kind of sound that you hear. And then the next person in your section is 2 meters behind you. It's quite much harder to hear them. So to get that sense of how the overall orchestra sounds is much more difficult.
What about the masks? How did you find those?
Mention. Well, I don't think anyone would say they like wearing a mask at the best of times, but it's funny. You realise that also just those little facial expressions, the little, you know, just even if you have two notes with, you know, the principal cello or something, you just have this quick little smile and look when you play.
Yeah. You
can still sort of have the look with your eyes, but you can't actually tell whether he's, you know, and knowing David Bellini, he could well be poking his tongue out at me. Or, you know, or whether they're, you know, you presume they're smiling at you.
Yeah. But
it sort of takes away this kind of level of communication that you take for granted without them.
It's fascinating, isn't it? I just find it a very interesting study in the way we communicate through body language. And, you know, as a conductor, that's something you're constantly aware of, but also every musician has that. That's so important, that the human interactions between us. But I suppose we shouldn't be complaining. We're back playing, and that's a good thing. And it's just different. And all those things I said, it's sort of a new reality, at least for the time being. Hopefully it'll change perhaps a bit next year. But is that the longest, like with the lockdown, is that, I'm presuming it was hard to kind of, you know, do any kind of playing on the level that you would normally do by being a full-time professional orchestral musician. So when the lockdown hit, is that the longest kind of break that you've had from playing? Did you find yourself kind of practicing, or did you just take a break? How did it work?
I did take a break. I kind of played on and off, but it was, you know, I mean, there was a period there where it was pretty clear we weren't going to be back together for a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did take a bit of a break. Still, you know, practiced kind of on and off, and then in the last couple of months, I've sort of been back into it a bit. You know, with the numbers going down and getting back to work and everything. So
yeah.
But it was, you know, in a way, it was kind of nice to let some muscles have a bit of a rest as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the relentlessness of the job, I don't think people fully understand that sometimes can be just so brutal. And, you know, the fact that you and Pip are both doing it together, I might touch on that a little bit later as we talk about family and work. And, you know, it was similar talking to, well, we've got a number of couples in the orchestra, don't we? You know, I talked to Prue Davis. She's been sitting next to Jeff there for 40 years. You know, they get back in the car and go home together. Just don't know quite how that works, but they've made it work, made it look easy. But let's go back to the beginnings for Matty Tomkins, because you grew up in Creswick, which I know very well, being from Ballarat. It's a town. How far out of Ballarat? About 20-minute drive or something?
Yeah, something like about 15 minutes north of Ballarat.
Yeah. And was it a musical family that you had?
Not to a huge extent. My dad learnt piano when he was a kid, but never, you know, only for a few years. Had a lot of classical albums that he used to play. So, and I used to listen to it.
Had an interest in it.
Yeah, yeah. So
And what about the fiddle? How on earth does a kid from Creswick all of a sudden start learning the fiddle out of nowhere?
well, my dad's father, so my grandfather, did actually play the violin.
Right.
And I do actually have some photos somewhere of when I was, maybe 6 or 7 or something, both kind of playing. But again, it was something he learned for a couple of years, but carried on. And yeah, it just happened that mum and dad knew another family whose children were learning the violin, and asked me when I was 5 if I was interested. And I guess when you're 5, I didn't really know anything about the violin, or it wasn't like I'd seen an orchestra and became
Yep.
fascinated by it. But I said, sure, yeah, I'll do that, and began having lessons in
Yeah.
Ballarat, and
It's
yeah, obviously liked it enough to kind of keep going. Um,
yeah.
it's interesting watching. My kids have been learning piano for a couple of years now, and we well, you probably know the same thing. The practice schedule can be a bit of a battle at times,
Oh
depending
yeah.
on the mood of the kids. So I'm sure I was every bit as kind of willful and moody and everything as they were. But obviously, I kind of kept at it.
It's funny how
Um,
we use the practice around here. It's not, I wouldn't say it's punishment, but it's kind of like you have to do that first before you get to,
yeah, yeah,
play
like
a video game or something. It's always the
yeah,
do your piano practice, then we'll talk about it. Um,
yeah. If you don't do that, well, I know you've got a play date tonight, but you're going to have to do 10 minutes when your friend's here.
and
Which they
so,
don't.
I mean, I was just going to say, it seems like a bit of a different idea of growing up in Creswick that I knew, because the kids I knew growing up in Creswick was very outdoorsy and rural, in the forest and all that kind of stuff. Were you one of those kids as well, like tearing around on your bikes and stuff?
Yeah, to a certain extent, yeah. I mean, we had basically bushland, sort of a couple of houses away from us, with there's like old mine shafts in the middle of there from leftovers
That's
from the
right.
1850s
Got to
and
be
stuff.
careful in Creswick.
You really do, actually. Like some of the walks out in the bush, and they're all sort of covered up now. You can easily, drop 10 meters if you went off the path.
Yep.
But yeah, there was a BMX track down there that we used to kind of tear
That's
around,
right.
and
Yeah.
Creswick's got like 16 grass, and that was a huge thing on Saturdays, that half the town would be up there playing tennis, and
Yeah.
so yeah, all that kind of aspect of growing up in the country as well
So who was your first
was
violin
there.
teacher? Do you remember?
So yeah, she was a Japanese lady, actually, named Reiko Moritz, who was living in Ballarat. So I learned
Yep.
from her for 2 or 3 years when I was 5.
Yep.
So she taught the Suzuki method,
Yep.
and I've got very vague, because that's it's 40 years ago, I guess, to date myself. But yeah, I can remember standing on some newspaper and her tracing around my feet, so I knew kind of where to stand. And I've
Yeah.
got sort of this memory. One of the things was kind of play and walk around at the same time, and I can sort of remember marching up and down her hall playing, probably playing Twinkle Twinkle or something like that.
Yeah. And
Um,
you were telling me that she had been in Nagasaki, when the bomb was
yeah,
dropped. Is that right?
that's my
Amazing.
memory of it. Yeah, she passed away probably a few years after I'd started learning with her, I think from a cancer that she got from that. So
Yeah,
yeah, which
wow.
is obviously terrible.
So you
Um,
moved to a new teacher
yeah,
called John Hughes. And so tell me about John, because this is where you sort of got a little bit of ensemble experience you're still in primary school, right?
yeah. So this was probably about grade 2 or grade 3 or something, I
Yeah.
think. John. So he was a school teacher in Ballarat, but also a violin teacher, and ran a string orchestra as well.
Yeah.
That I sort of started playing in when I was learning from him. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was my first time kind of playing in a group, I guess.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, like it becomes sort of a new level, because it's the violin's sort of hard enough when you're starting out. There's all this sort of technique to figure out, but then to have someone else next to you and these different sounds kind of coming in to your brain becomes another thing kind of process. But
yeah, and the next big opportunity was a big personality from Melbourne turned up, Margot von Pagay, who many of the string fraternity and many of the orchestral fraternity would know as a pedagogue, and he was at the Victorian College of the Arts for many years, and he ran the Gimignani. Was it a chamber orchestra? Is that what it was called? Gimignani? Yeah.
Maybe began as Gimignani Strings, I think, and then became chamber orchestra. And my John Hughes got him up to Ballarat one weekend to run a, kind of a weekend seminar, lessons, conducting, all that kind of stuff. And that was when I was in grade 6, I think, just before I went into high school, and then started learning from him in 1987.
Yeah.
And traveling to Melbourne to play in the orchestra and have lessons with him.
Unbelievable. So you do that on a Saturday morning, do the orchestra rehearsal, stay, have a lesson, and then come back. So who's doing that run with you as a little kid?
My dad drove me, so we'd basically leave Creswick at sort of 7:45 in the morning, I think.
Yeah.
And then be an orchestra rehearsal from 9:30 to 12:30, I think, or maybe even 1 o'clock. I can't quite remember. And then have half an hour for lunch, and then have a lesson for an hour, and then head back after that. Get home at like 4 o'clock or something like that.
Were you driven to do that? Was that something that was like, I'm really enjoying this?
I think I was. I mean, as much as I probably went through stages where I protested or felt like it was, because it is a big commitment, and I think
totally
a lot of it's a pretty common story, I think, amongst musicians that you do, and probably not even unique to music, but once you start to focus on something, other things have to give. So I'm sure, as a teenager, you full of resentment against lots of things, but I'm sure there were times when I felt it became a bit of a burden. I shouldn't say burden, but it became quite a big thing. But at the same time, I was obviously getting a lot out of it to kind of continue.
Well, you must have been super young in that group, because that wasn't actually a group for year sevens. This was a group for older kids. They were mainly VCA students and things, weren't they?
So I definitely, when I started, I was the youngest. I think I was in year 7, and I can actually remember my first rehearsal and just being lost through this entire entire flute concerto by Francais. I had no idea what was going on. I was just kind of sitting up the back of the seconds, kind of moving my bow around a little bit, and I was probably half a page away on the music. I really didn't know much about what was going on. But I still, to this day, I still see people who are musicians I catch up with now and again, and I can remember you, little Maddie, when you
little Maddie Tomkins.
12 years old. And so yes, as I got older, I probably have a couple of people I can, kind of pay that favor on to, but yeah.
And so we haven't really talked about Marco, because for those people who don't know Marco, he's a big personality. He's a fun guy, very demanding, and he strikes me as similar in character to quite a number of the other Dutch conductors that I've come across. Like, there's a certain intensity there.
There's a stereotype almost.
very passionate, and really wants the best, and he drives his students. So what was that like, coming from the nice chamber orchestra in Ballarat? All of a sudden Marco's there. Was he tough on you early on as well?
Yeah, look, he really was. And I mean, that was part of his teaching style, was to really not let you go on until you'd really got something right. And I can remember there was one lesson really early on, and I was learning the Haydn violin concerto, and I think we spent the entire hour on maybe the first. It was literally like a line and a half of music, and you do one thing, and it was no, you got to do this as well, and so you do that other thing, but forget something else, and like I can remember close, 45 minutes into this, just having this thought that I'm not going to cry, because it just like I was just let me play
kid.
another line or something like that, and so anyway, look, I got through it without tearing up, but yeah, it was, I guess maybe it was a kind of a test as well, but I think that, that lesson kind of held me in good stead later on, as far as, the amount of detail that you do need to go into.
Yeah, and also the resilience needed for a career as a professional musician. I mean, I had a similar thing with my teacher in Finland, Leif Segerstam, who was, again, a tough teacher. And I remember him saying, well, look, if you can't cope with me, orchestras are just going to eat you alive. So, he was, there's a certain kind of toughness that you get. I'm seeing questions coming in, which is wonderful. So keep them coming, please. And we'll do my best to get to as many of them. There's some really good ones as well. I'm talking with Matthew Tomkins, Principal Second Violin of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, whose wife, Philippa West, also plays in the MSO in the same section, if you don't mind.
Yes.
So how did that work with the kids? Because your kids are exactly the same age as mine, 8 and 6. So I think we nearly bankrupted the MSO Social Club funds the year they had to give us the congratulatory presents on becoming fathers again. But how did that work with you both going out nights and the kind of shift work, if you like, of an orchestral music career?
Look, we're pretty lucky in that my mum in particular does a lot of babysitting for us. So she'll often jump on the train from Ballarat and come down to look after the kids for a couple of nights a week, which is a godsend, really. And so that's been an incredible support. And then, you kind of rely on babysitting and after school care and play dates if you can kind of arrange them. All that kind of juggle is it's part and parcel of.
Hard to get to a routine, I imagine.
Yeah, look, it really is. I mean, it's my son had his first ever cricket thing on Friday night, because normally Friday nights we just can't commit to anything because it's probably the number one night of the week that we're going to be at work. So you've got to kind of just juggle your way through things and kind of muddle through. But that kind of family support is worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, that's gold. That's absolutely. And again, Prue was telling me a similar story, because I asked her the same kind of question. They had a friend of theirs who, I forget her name. I want to say Nanny Mabel. It was Nanny someone, but they were just like, it was like Mary Poppins turned up, So look, back to your musical development. We've talked about you going down to Melbourne and doing Geminiani Chamber Orchestra. We haven't really talked about what was going on at school. So you were at Ballarat Grammar School, which had a good music program, right? So were you kind of involved with that as well as the outside stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, I was pretty lucky. Like, they had a string orchestra and a symphony orchestra. They put on a musical production every year as well. Yeah. So I think string orchestra was kind of one lunchtime a week, and then after school one night a week was the orchestra as well. So it was great to just have that kind of, I guess, backup and support as well from.
Yeah, weren't we lucky in Ballarat to have those good programs? And the good music teachers. You were talking earlier to me about David Forrest, the head of music at Ballarat Grammar, Norm Newey, a wonderful trumpet player, and great musicians. The whole place seemed to be just full of these excellent musicians who were also teaching as well.
So we had, Calvin Bowman, the well-known organist and composer, years ahead of me at school, and David Hobson and David Hirschfelder. I think they were kind of left by the time I got there, but there's people from other schools in Ballarat as well.
There's just endless numbers. I mean, Genevieve Lacey was one of my contemporaries.
I remember we did a few things together at the South Street at Stedford. In the the kind of duo under 15 duo or something.
Yeah, I think she knocked me off in the under 14 woodwind solo one year. That was devastating. But fair, makes sense looking back on it. But
yeah, luckily she is possibly the nicest person you'll ever meet in your life. So it's a little bit easier to bear.
I'll give her that prize. That's fine. I'm not holding any grudges here, Maddie. You know, I'm interested also by the fact that you had other interests outside of music. We talked a little bit about the missing out factor, and I think that's particularly prevalent as someone who drove down to Melbourne every Saturday with my mum usually driving me. You do miss out on the school sports and the social events and that kind of stuff. Was there ever a time where you got to sort of slightly resenting it and just thinking this is too much?
Yeah, I think you know, that happens. I guess it's, you know, it's part and parcel of growing up as well. That you know, you realize you've got, at some point you actually have to make the choice and do it. So I think I remember one period where I just calling up Marco and saying I'm just a bit you know, I'm a little bit over this at the moment. I'm just going to take a couple of months. So I think I maybe had 2 or 3 months where I didn't really really, that was sort of year 11 or 12, and schoolwork starts to get a bit harder as well. And but yeah, obviously, you know, I had the intention of coming back to it, but just I remember those, you know, kind of periods.
Well, I guess the thing is you had options, right? So you were also very good and liked science and physics and chemistry and maths, and so you had this. And your dad, I should point out, has a PhD in chemistry. So there's a kind of a role model, I'm guessing, that exists there in your life as well. And so how did that play out as you went to university, like this sort of music versus those things relationship?
Well, yeah, it was a decision to be made, I guess, whether to kind of go, you know, do I go on and study music, or do I follow, you know, the science path, which I was really, you know, I did really like. That was, you know, kind of my favourite subject. So I went to uni actually thinking that I was going to do physics, and enrolled in a Bachelor of Science at Melbourne Uni. And it was a step up from year 12, I think, fair to say. So and look, to be perfectly frank, you know, the first year away from home and living in a residential college is possibly the environment was not as conducive towards you know, kind of or study as perhaps it could have been.
That's the most diplomatic way of saying first year university in a residential college. I mean, honestly, that's just, you're not going to get any work done in that environment. It seems optimistic.
I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people who kind of are on their knees thanking whoever that Facebook didn't exist in those days.
Yes, I do hear what you're saying there. But I mean, the good thing about uni was you're still playing music. So even though you're doing science and all these other things, you're still taking a minor in music and playing in the orchestra, right?
Yeah, so you're allowed to, I mean, or back in the day anyway, you could do a subject or two outside of the science faculty as part of that. So I did the like the practical study at and got I think there was some kind of bursary where you got your lessons, and no, actually that was from second year, but you got your lessons and got to play in the orchestra as the kind of paying for the lessons. So did that for the sort of 3 or 4 years, I think, at uni. That I did that as well. So that was great because I got to you know, still got to keep up the playing and playing the orchestra as well. So
and you were earning a bit of cash on the side too, playing weddings and
you know, the traditional kind of
we all do
student income is, you know, doing string quartets at weddings or, you know, parties and stuff.
So I'm conscious you finish your degree like 5 years. You finish your bachelor's degrees in what was it, physics and science?
It was chemical engineering, so it was science sort of more towards the chemistry side. But...
that sounds much easier. So this reminds me a little bit of Rebecca Chan, the great violinist who did a medical degree and then decided to go back to music and became the associate concertmaster of the Philharmonia Orchestra and played in the ACO and all this stuff. It was just
Becky's something else.
So you realized you could go back to science actually and got back into music. So that was a big call. Was it just because you missed it too much, or was just like, oh, I'm never going to know?
I sort of finished school and I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to do music, and then I finished uni and I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to do engineering or science. Yeah. So, I mean, my thought process, I think, was that if I wanted to do music, which I still thought I might, I probably needed to do that straight away, rather than if I got a job, you know, doing as an engineer or something 3 years later, I probably wouldn't have played much, and it would be getting pretty hard to go back to.
Yeah.
So I thought I would sort of just, you know, see where that led me for a couple of years. And then, you know, still hopefully have the option of doing something else if I decided it wasn't actually what I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing, or, you know, it wasn't working out. So.
Yeah, and you must have loved still playing. I mean, you're still playing in Gimignani Chamber Orchestra through this period as well. So you got all your mates there.
Yeah, exactly. And the kind of long-awaited overseas tour of Gimignani actually, that I think a lot of people had never thought would happen, actually happened in the middle of 1998.
My wife Joanne was in that tour. Yeah, she's playing French horn.
Yeah, so that was actually the first time I met Pip was that was that tour. Yeah, it was, and that was really incredible. It was the first time I'd left Australia. We flew to Croatia was the first stop. So we went to Dubrovnik and Split, and we went into this a place in Bosnia.
Yeah, shortly after the war, I'm guessing too. This was 97, 98 or something.
Yeah, this was sort of July 1998, and you know, this amazing town called Mostar in Bosnia, which is an incredible old bridge that was, I can't remember, it was hundreds, you know, 500, 700 years old. I can't remember exactly, that had just been destroyed, not, you know, with a year before we'd been there. And there's UN kind of peacekeepers walking around with massive machine guns on their back. And even like Dubrovnik is this incredibly beautiful city. You know, walled city by the ocean. That was, I think, did we decide King's Landing in Game
that's right, Game of Thrones. Yeah,
was filmed there. But yeah, it was just stunning. But then you see these old kind of marble walls with, like, you know, marks from bullets in them, and all.
Yeah, it's an important education, isn't it, from us with all of our sort of happy, you know, upbringings and the innocence of the Australian life. You
know, what people have been through is, you know.
So this is inspiring, obviously. You get itchy feet to play. You're starting to you know, work freelance. You've done your casual audition with the MSO. You up the practice a bit. You've had some lessons also from MSO violinist Mark Mogilevsky.
Yes.
But you've never done a major audition before. So you come back and it's kind of time to bring the heat of an audition. How did that all work out for you?
Look, it was no, the first one I did not great. I didn't really know what I was doing, I think.
Yeah, that's never a good start.
You're on the back foot. Really.
At the same time, you've got to start somewhere. I mean, at least you threw yourself in the deep end and did it, you know. So
yeah, so I did. There was an audition in for Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra that I went down to Hobart and did, and I sort of practiced, and I thought I knew the excerpts okay, and I didn't really know much about, like, I sort of played the notes on the page, but I didn't really have much of an idea of what the you know, where they kind of fit in the orchestra, or what you know, what the piece was about, and all this kind of stuff that you eventually realise that you need to do. Like, I don't think I'd even actually played them to anyone. I just kind of did it on my own, and it was, you know, it was okay, but it wasn't anywhere near the level, you know, needed to win a job. And then it so happened that the next audition I went for was in MSO. So in the second violin section, round about, it was kind of late 1999, I think.
Yeah, so you were a fast learner, right? So you took your lumps from the TSO audition and quickly got on the bike again, and obviously.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I guess, you know, I do have a little bit of a competitive instinct as well. So, you know, just not getting through the first round didn't really sit well with me. So I thought, whatever I do, I want to get through the first round.
Yeah.
And work to actually make that happen. So you got the excerpts a couple of weeks, 2 weeks with them before the audition day. So I basically practiced kind of day and night for 2 weeks, you know, listened to recordings, knew everything backwards and sideways, and was lucky enough to get the job. So
yeah, smashed it. Well, thank goodness you did. But it sounded like it was an amazing start, because that was the year that the Europe tour happened with Marcus Stentz, which by all accounts was one of the greatest tours the orchestra ever did, you know, an 18 concert European tour. Did that sort of set an unrealistic expectation of an orchestral life? You just think, oh, this is just how it is.
It's not, unfortunately, not always that glamorous. You're not always
that's it.
In a hotel on the lake in Montreux and waking up to the, you know, sun rising over mountains in Switzerland. So, look, it was fantastic though. That was, I think we were gone for about 4 weeks, and 18 concerts. So we went to Canary Islands and Switzerland and Germany and Austria. And I had a ball.
You were talking about the repertoire, you know, that you had time to get to know the repertoire that was on that tour, because you had multiple performances. But when you got back, it was just hold on for the ride, wasn't it? Like you had big stuff week after week. What did you play when you first got back?
Well, you know, so on the tour, I think our big pieces were. Did we actually do pictures on that tour?
You did pictures. Yep, I remember that.
And there was Alban Violin Concerto and Bartók Piano Concerto and Rachmaninoff Violin the Dead. And, you know, it's a lot of concerts, but, you know, we probably played Brahms too, you know, 8-10 times on that tour.
So you get to know it really well.
In a way, you settle into it. And funnily enough, the Geminiani tour we talked about earlier, we played Brahms too on that tour as well. So, you know, I felt like I knew that piece pretty well.
Yeah.
And then we got back to Melbourne, and, you know, obviously you're on trial for 6 months. The first concert back, we did Bartók Concerto for Orchestra and Beethoven 9. And next week was Mahler 6. And and my head was just exploding.
That's a real job now.
I don't know that I can actually do this.
Yeah.
And mentally more than physically, just the amount of kind of unfamiliar, because I didn't really know the Bartók and I didn't really know the Mahler.
Well, it's all new to you, isn't it? Because this is the thing about new players coming into the orchestra. You've got players who have been there for 40 years, like, you know, your principal, Rudy Osadnik, by that stage had been in the orchestra 40 years.
40, yeah, exactly.
He's played all this stuff, you know, bunches of times, knows it really well. And there you are, a fledgling, learning it all. There's a big difference in the experience of the repertoire, isn't there? Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, you know, now I've been in the orchestra, you know, 20 years now. I sort of got to do half the Mahler cycle with Marcus, and basically all of it except for 8 with Sir Andrew. Yeah. And, you know, we do, you know, Mahler symphonies kind of in between that as well with other conductors. So I feel like you know, coming to a piece now, I kind of know, you get a sense of the whole piece.
What to expect. Well, you've picked a piece of music for us to listen to that is from that period, at least when your first experience of it. What are we going to be hearing?
So another Mahler symphony for fans of up. It seems to be a recurring theme. I've gone with Mahler 6. That was the first Mahler symphony that I played in the orchestra.
Wow. What a way to start with that brooding introduction, slightly menacing march.
It's quite terrifying actually at the start of that. That symphony. So,
well, what do we have a listen to it? Have a listen to it, then we can talk about the next excerpt.
Yeah.
He was in a bad mood that day, wasn't he? I mean,
it's menacing, that beginning.
Very grumpy indeed. But I mean, obviously there are these beautiful lyrical passages in that, and you've picked a another piece. What's the second excerpt we're going to be hearing?
Second excerpt is from the slow movement, which is generally done as the second movement. There's a bit of conjecture about whether the two middle movements, which order they should go in, but towards the end of that, and it's to me, it's just one of the most beautiful things that he wrote. So yeah. I never tire of listening to this.
Well, let's have a listen to it. Sir Andrew Davis conducting the MSO back in 2016, the slow movement from Mahler's Sixth Symphony, chosen by my guest here tonight, Matthew Tomkins. Yeah, you're right. That's very rewarding, isn't it? And as a violinist, I imagine just soaring on those melodies.
Yeah, SOAR for everyone at home, not SAW, by the way.
That's right. I mean, it's beautiful music to play. It must be so rewarding to play.
Yeah. I was kind of blown away by that, and just the other excerpt I nearly chose was the beginning of the last movement, which is this kind of amazing dream-like. I was reading about it earlier. Someone described it as hallucinogenic almost.
Yes.
Just having these sounds coming at you was
so. Well, at that point in time, you're in the section. The principal job comes up. Was that a natural decision to audition? Because this is Rudy Osadnik's job, the guy I spoke about before. You must have learned a lot from him, but it's a big step up to come from within the section and then to be the leader.
Yeah, I did kind of give it a fair bit of consideration about whether I was actually keen for it or not. Because as you say, it's a huge change, and I really liked my job as well. So there's obviously additional kind of pressures that come with that, but also Rudy had been in the job for a long time. He's he was in the orchestra 47 years, yeah. And in the principal's second job for I'm not actually sure how long, but a long part of that, and I kind of had to, in a way. It's not the kind of thing that might come back in a couple of years when you feel more ready.
Of course. Yeah, exactly. Was it difficult though, coming from within the orchestra to that job, or within that section? Like, it's different than coming in fresh and sort of being this new person. And was it hard, do you think?
In a way it was, because you're kind of used to being kind of part of the group as opposed to more at the pointy end, I guess.
Yeah.
And kind of being up the front, and all of a sudden it's your job to talk to the conductors and the other principals, and responsible more for how the section sounds. If things are going wrong, it's kind of sometimes up to you to have the right thing to say. So yeah, look, it was. But having said that, they are just a great bunch of people as well. So
yeah, it's a great section, isn't it? Second violins of MSO.
That made it incredibly easy in a way as well.
Yeah. There's a question that's come in, Maddie. How do principal string players keep track of what's happening in the section when they're looking forward? Like, looking to your colleagues, watching the conductor. how do you kind of listen back through the section? How does that work?
Oh, that's a great question. You do your best, and what we were talking about earlier about with the distancing and making it difficult to hear. It can be hard depending on the hall to really tell what's happening in your section.
Yeah.
Sometimes you kind of get the couple of desks in the row behind you, and you can kind of hear what's happening there, but not so well behind that.
Yeah.
So, but I trust these people.
Yeah, of course. Well, the one thing we didn't talk about, because we're running short on time, was your over 10 years with the Flinders Quartet and this wonderful bunch of musicians. It was Erica Kennedy, yourself, Zoe Knighton and Helen Island. I mean, just an extraordinary bunch of people, the force of nature that is Zoe Knighton, driving that quartet along. That experience in chamber music must have been very, very valuable to you when you were going for that position as principal second violin. Just your knowledge and experience in chamber groups. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was invaluable the 13 years that I was in the quartet, which it started literally maybe 4 months after I started my trial in 2000. The quartet kind of started.
Yep.
All got together and kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah, there was a question here about, did you make a conscious choice to play second violin as opposed to first violin in chamber and orchestral music?
Not a conscious choice. No, it was just kind of the way it happened. But the first job I went for was in the second violin section. So, and I really like the job. I think it kind of suits me to be slightly, more in the middle of things than way up high.
Yeah.
And likewise, like in the quartet, really, I really loved that kind of role. And yeah, back to your other point about informing the orchestral playing, it really, I think that, the chamber music really kind of distills a lot of the elements that you need in orchestral playing, the kind of listening and the blending and the voice. Or, at any point in time, you're going to be playing a different role. You've got the tune, then all of a sudden you're accompanying, then you're you might be the bass line, or effectively for a bit, and just that. Having conversations about that for 13 years was...
Well, that's an amazing period of time in terms of stability. I mean, you do hear of quartets kind of staying together for long periods of time, but you were saying to me that nobody missed a performance in that 13 years.
Yeah, it was literally right. I left the quartet at the end of 2012, as did Erica, and it was literally my last kind of series with them that Erica was pregnant with her first child, so she didn't play for that. But up until that point, to my memory, every single concert,
amazing.
We never replace anyone or cancel anything.
Yeah, and of course, it's still going, right? Flinders Quartet is still going. I've worked with them this year myself. Yeah,
which is fantastic.
It is. More questions, mate. Did you enjoy Brian Cox's show with the MSO last year, considering it was a crossover between science and music?
I loved it, actually. He's amazing. And yeah, just, his kind of delivery and some of the, the stuff he was talking about, Einstein predicting black holes, 70 years ago. And finally, I think it was last year, they finally got a camera good enough to take a picture of what he predicted. And yeah, it was great. And Mahler, do we do Mahler 9 or Mahler 10 in that? And Sibelius 5?
Mahler 10, Adagio, Sibelius 5.
Yeah.
And
Paul Dean's
new violin concerto.
That was a great repertoire.
It was a great program.
So, it was, talking about, concert presentation that's a bit different. That one really worked, I thought. Yeah,
well, I think, it's a good time to plug the 2021 season too, because tickets go on sale tomorrow, Matty. That's a big day for the orchestra as well. There's lots to look forward to. As well, and a lot of new music. There's another question around, how do you prepare for new premieres when you can't just research a whole variety of old performances and records? How do you get pieces in your ears as a string player?
Oh, it's hard. I mean, I guess, you know, you got to start with learning your part and your notes.
Do most of it in the rehearsal, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
and a lot of it just takes place in the rehearsal. And you know, you get the way we do bowings is normally the concertmaster will bow the first violin part and then pass it on to the other string principals, and we work off that. So you get an idea, at least I get an idea of what the first violin part is like, and a lot of it is left up to the rehearsal room. Yeah.
You know, there's a question about what it's like being taught by Mark Mogilevsky, who's in the orchestra and now working together in the orchestra. I know Mark's incredibly proud of his students and in particular you. Is that special, having someone that you've learned from sitting in the orchestra?
Yeah, it's great. And Mark is like, he's a great guy. He's a lovely guy.
He
and
is.
You know, actually, well, Pip, my wife, actually moved from Brisbane to learn from him as well. So
that's right.
You know, I owe him.
He's got a lot to answer for as well. Well, look, mate, I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me tonight, Matty. As usual, I mean, we could keep talking and keep drinking wine. Have you got more wine there to keep you going for a little bit longer? Yes, I saw that product placement right there. Yeah. It's a bit left. You better save some for Pip. Or did Pip drink most of that?
She had some before. So.
Well, I know it's a busy week for the MSO, so I really hope you, Pip, and the kids have a beautiful Christmas together with loved ones. Thank you for being such a wonderful member of the orchestra, Matty. You've got a wonderful, easy way with your leadership style, and your commitment and professionalism sets a really high standard for those around you, and one that your wonderful second violin section live up to superbly, I have to say. Bravi secondi.
Bravi secondi, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And what a section it is. It's a great strength of our orchestra to have people like you and Pip in it. And I look forward to more music making with you in 2021, assuming we've both recovered to the shock of working together by then.
Yeah, exactly.
So thanks for joining me tonight, mate. I really appreciate it.
Very much for having me, Ben.
Well, that's all we have time for in tonight's edition of Up Late with Ben Northey. And I hope that wherever you are watching, you're safe and well, that your Christmas plans enable you to be with family, friends, and loved ones as we come to the end of this pretty bizarre year. Most bizarre year. I'd like to give a special shout out to all of the musicians in all fields of music whose work has not yet returned. Here we are talking about getting back to work. I'm very conscious of the fact that's not the case for everyone. The singers, we need to do more for you. Those who are normally busy at this time of year playing music at, you know, Christmas functions, corporate functions, end of year office parties, you're in our thoughts, and stay strong. 2021 promises better days ahead. And goodness me, it's nearly Christmas. I'm still getting my head around that. I really need to get organising around here for the kids and getting trees and all that sort of paraphernalia. But next week is the final episode of Up Late with Ben Northey, and I'm thrilled for the year, and I'm thrilled to announce that we are finishing with a real highlight. And I'll be interviewing one of the absolute greats of Australian music, a great friend and colleague of the MSO composer, Nigel Westlake, as we celebrate the 25th anniversary of the movie Babe and the MSO's recording of Nigel's beautiful score. Did you play on that, Matty? Play on the score for Babe?
I think that was just before my time.
Oh, okay. There you go. Yeah, that is a while back now, actually. Yeah. So I'll ask him about his memories of working with the MSO on the production, the continuing legacy of Babe, both the music and the film is very popular. He went and conducted that with the New York Philharmonic. It's just amazing. And what it means for us all, that movie in 2020, I feel like we could all use a bit of Babe's optimism and joy in 2020, to be honest, to finish it all off. So I hope you can join us next Monday night or on demand for that special interview. And in the meantime, keep taking care of each other out there. Enjoy those recent eased restrictions in Melbourne and go well.